Logic's Channel EQ is a workhorse multi-channel EQ plugin that combines all of the EQ styles we saw in the single band EQ in the last video and a lot more. So it combines 8 color-coded bands in one unit, and you can see the icons across the top. We have a low cut, and then we have the low shelf, and then we have 4 separate parametric bands. You'll notice as I hover my mouse over each one of these that they're color-coded, and all the controls, the control point and the parameters underneath, are updated for the colors of each band. So we have 4 parametric bands, then a high shelf, and then a high cut. And you can turn each of these bands on or off by simply clicking on these icons. So for example, let's say I make a boost over there, I can easily temporarily bypass it like that and then toggle it on and off to see and hear what the changes are. And we can option click any of these parameters to reset them. So for example, here we see a numeric display for each of the bands, and here's the frequency, the amount of gain, and the Q factor. I can option click any of these individual parameters or just option click on the control band and that'll reset it. Now, when you first call up Channel EQ, your settings might not look exactly like mine. I think I customized mine along the way somewhere. If you find a setting that you like as a default, you can always go save as default, which is what I did with the frequency bands set to where I like them. And in fact, I'm going to just go to recall default. And there, that's the way I have mine set when it first gets called up. Now, there's also a fast Fourier transform analyzer that we can turn on or off here, and we can have it pre or post any of these EQ changes. And we'll look at that later on in the video. So we can basically click one of these nodes and drag it up, but we can also click a curve line segment anywhere, like in there, and just drag from there. And you see a border around each band, and it changes colors, as I mentioned before, with each band. So we can click there, drag up or down, left and right, and so on. Now you see this little horizontal line. When we click the node, we get this line. I can drag that up and down to simply adjust the gain and not move the frequency. And we can also click here and get this little icon, this double arrow, and that'll adjust the Q or the width. Now you can adjust all of these numerically from here, and you can double click and type in a value if you want, for example. But you can also do it like that, and then like that, or just kind of freehand moving all over. Now there's a couple of shortcuts. You can use Command to lock the movement into one direction. So for example, let's say that's the amount of gain I want, but I want to explore the frequencies nearby. Holding Command will lock the movement to horizontal. Or maybe I like that frequency and I'm not sure how much I want to cut or boost. That same Command key will then lock it and just allow you to move vertically. So it'll lock it in one direction. Now, if you use Command and Option together, you can click and drag on that to change the Q or the width, and I use this all the time. So those are some nice, handy shortcuts. Now, let's say I've got a couple of different bands adjusted. I can click outside, and that'll deselect whatever band is selected. So that's selected there, and even if I move my mouse away, it's still selected. But if I click, it'll deselect. And we also can position in the intersection over here and get a 4-way arrow like this, and there we can adjust in all directions all at once, kind of like a free-form movement. Now we have scale on the side here for decibels, for how much gain. So for example, there's 8.7 dB of gain, and I can slide this around to view the range in different areas, but we can also change the scaling. If I hold down Control and click, we can go to linear 12 dB, where we see only 12 dB of range. So now that same 8.7 takes up a lot more of the range, and I have to scroll even to see it all. So this is great if you're just making very minute adjustments of 2 or 3 dB. But we can change it to a 30 dB range, where, again, this doesn't change any of the values. It's just how it's represented, in 60 dB range if you're doing very broad changes. I like warped, which is logarithmic and nonlinear. We see the greatest range in the first 20 dB, and then as I scroll, you'll see they get closer together above that because there's traditionally a little bit less action in that area of the range. Now we can offset the gain of the entire plugin here, but we have something else here called Visualize Master Gain. And what that means is, say I'm boosting this, it shows us what the output of the whole plugin is going to be. Because this band is boosted, it gives us an idea of how much everything is going to be raised. And when that's off, you don't see that kind of elevated range. Now we can control click in here as well and get the same options. And we can control click on the side here and do the same thing. But when the analyzer is on, this changes to the range of the analyzer, and we can have 60 dB or 120 dB range. And this pertains to what's playing underneath. I'm going to play this on the bass track now. And that's the analyzer. So same part, just the range is different here. And we can have it pre the EQ. You see that's lower. Or post, where it's raised up there. Now I'm just going to option click on these to reset them. And we also have something called Q coupling, which we can turn on or off. And if we right click, we get a drop down menu. So I'm going to turn this off. And as I move this up, let me set the Q to a bit of a narrower value. The Q, the width stays pretty much the same. As we get to larger ranges, it broadens a bit, and that's kind of normal behavior. But with Q coupling on, the gain and the width are tied together, and we have different modes. So proportional, it'll kind of stay the same, but get a bit narrower as we get into higher ranges. So it's a little more surgical as we get higher. And they all exhibit slightly different characteristics of how much the Q will change. There, it's a lot more gradual increase when we move up and move down. It gets wider on top. And we have light, medium, strong. And then we have asymmetrical, where there's more of a narrowing when we're cutting rather than boosting. Here, the width is preserved while boosting, but the same value will narrow. So they're just different relationships between the gain and the width, and you can experiment with those and see what you like best. And we have high quality processing that we can enable or disable there. And then we have this, which is very interesting. By default, if you have this on a stereo track, it'll process both the left and right together, but we can process the left and right independently. Maybe you have some drum overheads and the ride cymbal on the right is a little more strident and you need to maybe do a dip down there, but you want it to affect the right channel only, just for example. And then we can operate on mid and side signals only, which we'll explore in another video, but it's a very powerful way of dealing with the stereo spectrum in terms of what's the same on both sides and what's different on both sides. So I'm going to end off here, and we'll put the channel EQ to work in the next video.